All right, welcome to our next class on CSE 103. Last week we talked a little bit about communism and how its influence is dependent on the evolution philosophy. Now we're going to continue. We left off talking a little bit about the money and how money is controlled. And we have, totally unknowingly to most people, we've lost all of our money. We're carrying around paper, and we all think we still have money. And we have been totally, completely robbed and don't even know it. It's absolutely masterful the way they did this by taking away the money and giving us paper. And this was all done, you can, if you missed that, watch the last class, but the Constitution the government's very clear that money is a certain number of grams of gold or silver, real money. Well, we don't get that anymore. We get paper notes. If I said, Steve, I'll buy your truck, I'm going to give you an IOU for $8,000. I give you the IOU and you give me the truck. And you walk around thinking, man, I've got $8,000. No, you have an IOU for $8,000, right? And all of the Federal Reserve notes that we have are IOUs. They are not money. But boy, have we been duped into that one. Okay, Mondex is a corporation that is probably going to be one of the one of the key players in the end times here toward the mark of the beast. Monetary and Dexter, this is what it is. It's a combination of these two words. It's how they chose the name Mondex for their corporation. Webster's Dictionary defines monetary as pertaining to money and Dexter as belonging to or located on the right hand. If someone is ambidextrous, what does that mean? They can use both hands, right? Dexter as relating to the hand. The word ambidextrous means able to use both hands, and Dexter means pertaining to the right hand. So MasterCard has 51% ownership of Mondex. Of course, MasterCard is one of the biggest credit card companies there is. Now think about how the sequence here. You go to the store, you buy something from the store, they scan it over the scanner. It's all done electronically. Then they swipe your MasterCard. A phone call is made. Does this guy really have money? Comes back, yeah, he's fine. Go ahead, accept it. And the store must pay somewhere between 2 and 4% to MasterCard of the purchase. If you buy something for $100, MasterCard makes either $2, $3, or $4, depending on what arrangement they have set up. And they didn't do anything except guarantee that the card was good. And they have pretty high fraud rate, which I'm sure some of their interest, plus the person's going to pay interest on that card. So not only is it the interest you pay on your MasterCard, every time you purchase, the store must pay 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% to MasterCard just for the privilege of letting you do that. That gets to be an awful lot of money if you buy something. We bought a car once, not a new car, we bought a used car for my wife on a credit card. And the MasterCard made a fortune off of that. 2 or 3%, I think it was like $9,000, for this used car, or $10,000, and it amounts to a few dollars. It's just one transaction. So the same phone call, it didn't cost them much of anything. One of the leaders, Robin Kelly, said, "This is the final stage in becoming a global reality," said Robin Kelly of Mondex International. "With MasterCard's backing, there's nothing to stop Mondex now from becoming the global standard. You need to keep an eye open for smart cards. They are coming next. You guys in the military already have a Mark card, which has an enormous amount of information in there. It's a little computer circuit built right into a card. You got yours with you? You got to have it with you, right? Steve, you got yours? That little Mark card. The next step is very simple. It becomes a little microchip, and it's injected in the right hand. I met last night. I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I met with, this morning I was in Little Rock, but I met with Carl Sanders. Carl Sanders has been a friend of mine for years. He is one of the guys who helped invent the little microchip. And he travels all over and speaks on this topic. He's a Christian and shows people, look folks, we are very close to the coming of the Lord. 20 years ago, the prophecy that everybody would receive a mark in their hand or in their forehead before you could buy or sell, 20 years ago, that was people laughed at that prophecy. Yeah, right. How are you going to get a mark to buy or sell? And Carl Sanders has a lot of information how the Greek word for mark is etching. And microchips are etched in the silicone. And he goes through a whole series of how it fits exactly what the book of Revelation says is going to happen. Some type of little chip is probably what's going to be the mark of the beast. And it's going to be in the right hand or the forehead. Anyway, smart cards are here. SET technology means secure electronic transaction. Everybody that uses their credit card, of course, wants to make sure, is this secure? Are you going to give my credit card number to other people so they can charge stuff? You know, it's assumed that the card is secure. It's called SET technology. It's interesting they chose that name because Set is the Egyptian god of evil, or Satan. It's just a coincidence, I'm sure, but AT&T Lucent Technologies purchased the franchise from Mondex USA. Their logo is the symbol of the solar serpent, the red dragon, which is Lucifer. How many have ever seen Lucent Technologies' red circle? You see it all over the place, on telephones. I mean, there's a huge corporation. Lucent is composed from Lucifer and Enterprises. They seem to be quite flagrant in naming their products. Styx is the name of one of their products, which is a river in Hades, according to the Satan worshippers. Janus, that's the two-faced god. You can use Janus, I believe, to order stocks or bonds or something like that. You ever heard of Janus? That's the two-faced god. Now, I'm not saying everybody involved in this is evil. Half the folks probably don't even know. But Satan does have plans for a one-world government. And you have to control the money. People will not be able to buy or sell without their authority. Right now, if you did not have any cash and you didn't have a checkbook and you went to the store to buy something, what would they do? They would not let you buy it, right? It's just going to be very simple. I don't think there's going to be a big thing where Christians get to stand up and say, I'm refusing to take this mark, you know, here, chop my head off. It just won't be an opportunity like that. I think it'll just be a quiet, gradual choking of the system where if you don't have this mark, you just simply don't buy. No stores will take cash anymore. No stores will take credit cards. Anyway, this is the things I've been told about some of this, so you can read it for yourself and check it out if you like. There's email and website to get information. But Lucent Technologies is naming their products like Styx and Janus. Inferno, promoted with a quote from the Inferno, a story about Lucifer in the bowels of hell. This company deliberately chose to move their new offices into 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. That's what I was told, and I saw the picture of the building, 666 on the building. Now, whether they moved since then or not, I don't know, but that was, somebody sent me a video about that. There's a lot of information going around. Okay, Karl Marx's next plank in the Communist Manifesto. We've been going through his 10 planks in the Communist Manifesto. Number 6 was government ownership of communication and transportation. Right now, the government owns just about every car in the United States. You probably think that you own a car, but you don't. When the car was manufactured, a certificate of, I think they call it a certificate of manufacture, was created. It was sent to when the car entered the state of Florida, the state of Florida kept the certificate of origination is what it's called. They issue a certificate of title. You then, when you bought the car, they gave you a certificate of title. Now, if you buy a brand new car, only if you buy a new car, and only if you pay for it with silver or gold, then you can demand that you get the certificate of origination. Now you really own the car. You don't have to buy license plates. You don't have to, because really, buying a license plate is renting the car off of the state for a year. And in some states, the license plates are incredibly expensive. I mean, like in California, if you own a new car, they rate it by how much the car weighs and how many horsepower it is, and just your plates might be $400 a year, every year. So the government right now has control of transportation. This is one of the Communist Manifesto planks, and we have slowly allowed this to happen and not realize what we've done. Very few people even realize this has already been accomplished. The goal was to accomplish all these things with the least amount of waves, and so the fewest possible people understand what's happening. And it has worked. Government ownership of factories and agriculture. And there's been an enormous amount of work in that. There's stories told of, you know, there are so many agricultural agents that are regulating these farmers. You know, the farmers are under so many regulations. You know, they have to get their agent to tell them, what can I plant this year? You know, is it okay if I plant corn this year, please, please? I'd like to plant corn. No, there's too much corn on the market. Why don't you plant soybeans this year? They tell them what to do. Two government agents were meeting one morning, and one of them was crying. And his friend said, what are you crying about? He said, my farmer died. They have about one farmer per agent. There are that many agents out there. It's unbelievable what's happening. And more farmers are finding it more and more difficult to keep going under all the bureaucratic regulations. So small farmers are going out of business and they're selling out to the huge co-ops, and there are gigantic farms being created, just like they have in the Soviet Union for years. Now in the Soviet Union, the efficiency is real bad. If they bring in, if they plant and if they harvest 100 bushels of corn, only about 10 or 15 bushels makes it to the store. There's so much waste. I mean, this is all a communist system over there, and the guys who's plowing the field, he doesn't care. He's trying to get in his 8 hours. He could care less about that field, okay? If it's tractor's low on oil, oh well, tough. It's not my tractor, it's the government's tractor. Private property ownership is the only way things like this can possibly work. So, Communist Manifesto, plank number 7 was government ownership of factories and agriculture. And it's really pretty incredible how far along this has already succeeded in America, where they tell the farmers what they can plant. They now have satellites up in Europe, well, satellites all over the world, but they're spying on farmers to see if they have more cows than they're allowed to have, or more sheep than they're allowed to have. They can actually count them from the satellites. Oh, you're cheating, you've got more than you're supposed to have, or you're planting more stuff than you're supposed to have. We have just about lost this battle, folks. Number 8, his goal was government control of labor. The union movement began. Of course, there was a good cause for the unions, because the factories were cruel and ruthless, and child labor laws and all sorts of things. So there's a real tough call here of who's right and who's wrong. But in general, the union's mentality is, we're going to tell you what you have to pay us. And the Bible mentality, as I understand it, is, if I own this field and I say I'm going to pay you, $6 an hour to come pick my corn, and you don't like it, well then go get a different job. Go plant your own cornfield. If you don't like it, go get your own cornfield. But see, the union's mentality is very different. When I was up at General Motors in the union, it was so frustrating to me, because I was on an assembly line job, we built middle-sized trucks like they use for dump trucks and school buses and that size, the C60, C70 series at General Motors. The truck comes down the assembly line and we would do our job to the truck, and sometimes the line would break down. There were people who would deliberately break the line down just because they wanted to go take a coffee break. Guys would take some of the cogs and wheels and gears and stuff, and they would toss in a bucket of a coffee can full of nuts and bolts to jam it up, knowing it would take maintenance 2 hours to fix it, just because they wanted to take a break and go get some coffee. After all, it's not their factory. They're getting paid by the hour regardless. So when the line would break down, I would grab a broom and sweep the floor. The union steward came by and chewed me out royal and said, "Don't you ever sweep the floor around here." I said, "Why not? The line's broke. I'm sitting here doing nothing. I don't like to be idle. I want to do something." He said, "By you sweeping that floor, you're taking bread off of somebody else's table. They hire a sweeper to do that." My father-in-law, I was with him yesterday up in Arkansas. My son, Kenandy, was just with him this morning and left up there. He was general foreman at Caterpillar Tractor Company. And the stories he can tell would just curl your hair, the stuff they would have to do. They have to hire like 5 people. If they really need 3 people to do a job, they have to hire 5. Because absenteeism is so incredible, because the union knows, the people know, hey, they can't fire me without real red tape going through. One of the guys that swept the floor at General Motors when I worked there up in Truck and Coach Building 6, his name was Red. We called him Red, big, tall, red-headed fella. He only worked 3 days a week. He would call in sick at least 2 days a week. I mean, for the whole 2 years I was there. I said, "Red, why do you work 3 days a week?" He said, "Well, I just can't quite make it on what they pay me for 2. That's his thinking. Well, okay. You can't help a fellow like that, Okay. But government has got an enormous amount of control over the labor market. Number 9, corporate farms, regional planning. And each of these can be developed. We've got a lot more stuff we want to talk about here, but each of these can be talked about in great detail, and there are people who make the communist advance in America their whole ministry. Folks, we have just about lost the war to communism, and if you think communism is dead, you are really deceived. Then you really have lost out on reality. Number 10, free education. This was one of Karl Marx's planks in his Communist Manifesto. Free education for all children in public schools, and watch this carefully, combination of education with industrial production. Karl Marx said the purpose of education is to make people good workers, good state citizens, so they can be productive for the state. How many have ever heard of outcome-based education? School to work, Goals 2000. There are numerous communist-type programs here in America already in place, already working. Kids go to school, and there's going to be a certificate of mastery where you just, after a few years, they're going to tell you what you're going to become. Well, you're going to become a farmer. They don't say it's because you're pretty stupid. All you can do is plow, plow a field. Not that farmers are stupid. Believe me, you got to be really smart if you own your own farm. You got to know just about everything. But this business of what is the purpose of education? The purpose of education in America originally, 200 years ago, you wanted to teach the kid to read as soon as possible so that he could read God's Word, so that he could know what God wanted him to do, so that he could be a good Christian. If he's a good Christian first, then you don't have much problem. He's going to be a good citizen. And the goal was, though, to raise good Christians, a godly people. And if a constitutional republic like America started off with, and both theoretically still have, is dependent on the people being self-controlled. The reason you have diapers on a kid is because he does not have any internal controls yet. You have to have external controls. And as a person grows, hopefully, they would develop internal controls where they don't need the external control. A population that has internal control, that wants God to tell them what to do. Can you imagine if everybody in the world, let's stick everybody in Florida, if everybody in Florida wanted to do what God said, they wanted to do right. God says, whatsoever your hand findeth to do, do it with your might. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, gathereth her meat in the summer. Nobody tells the ant what to do. Who's the foreman on the job for the ants? They don't have any. But watch them. There are thousands and thousands of them all working. I sat down, next to an ant pile one time with a notepad and just made notes for an hour as I watched things that I noticed about these ants. They're always time stepping on each other. And nobody griped. I mean, if people could only learn to do that, I saw one ant carrying a piece of a bug. He's a little tiny ant dragging this huge old piece of bug. He's pulling like crazy. 5 or 6 more were wandering by without anybody saying a word. All of a sudden, they grabbed on and started pulling with him. Nobody's telling them to do this. Suppose everybody in Florida was a godly person, wanted to do right, did not want to steal, they were honest, and they worked hard. The Protestant work ethic, it's often called. Can you imagine what it would be like living in Florida? You wouldn't need all the rules and regulations, would you? You only need laws, you only need external controls if the people don't have internal control. So one of the goals of communism is to make people wicked, which justifies more external control. Whereas if people are godly, you don't need as much external control. And God, in His wisdom, will generally give a country what they deserve. And I'm afraid America has become so wicked, we're going to get what we deserve, which is probably a totalitarian government. The Bible says, for the transgression of the land, many are the princes thereof. The reason a lot of countries have a lot of bureaucracy is because they're wicked. Basically, they need all these folks telling them what to do. Adolf Hitler said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. United Nations sponsored the World Declaration on Education for All in 1990. They called for the nations of the world to adopt a common education system, complete with implementation timetables and recommended curriculum. A world curriculum. Interesting. In our own nation, Goals 2000, School to Work, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Profiles of Learning, now before Congress, are totally consistent with the One World Government recommendations of the 1990 UN Declaration. That's what Alan Quist said, Minnesota House Representatives. John Dunfree in the Humanist magazine said in 1983, the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith that will replace the rotting corpse of Christianity. There is a real battle going on. And they decided 200 years ago the place to fight this battle is in the public schools. They figured we would slowly take over the public schools, take over the curriculum, take over the teachers, take over the teachers' colleges. It started with the teachers' colleges. Some people got in key positions in colleges that teach teachers. And then they train them with this humanist thinking, and this spreads on then, and it has permeated our system. Okay? This fellow said, every child who enters school at age 5 is mentally ill because he comes to school with allegiance toward our elected officials, founding fathers, institutions, government, patriotism, nationalism, sovereignty. All these prove the child is sick because the well individual is one who has rejected all those things and is what I call the true international child of the future. David Pierce at Harvard University said that. In other words, if you love your country, you're mentally ill. You need help. If you believe in obedience to authority, well, you're sick. You need help, you know. A well child has rejected all these things. He's rejected the founding fathers. You know, it's interesting. Go pick up some history textbooks today. Go to the public school, get some history textbooks, and see how much you see about George Washington, Patrick Henry, some of the founding fathers of our country, and see what they say about them. The Gablers have done enormous research on this. Mel Gabler in Longview, Texas. They'll have books and books on this topic. Sometimes textbooks will have a whole page on Marilyn Monroe or Charles Manson and one sentence on George Washington in a history textbook. And they try to make the founding fathers look bad every way they can. Social science book from HBJ, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich Corporation, said, any child who believes in God is mentally ill. That was used in a textbook. Charles Potter said in the Humanism, A New Religion magazine, 1930, education is the most powerful ally of humanism, and every American public school is a school of humanism. What can the theistic Sunday school, meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children, do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching? Here we see, clear back in 1930, they were going to try to use the schools to teach the kids humanism 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. John Patterson said, as a matter of fact, creationism should be discriminated against. No advocate of such propaganda should be trusted to teach science classes or administer science programs anywhere under any circumstances. Moreover, if they are now doing so, they should be dismissed. In other words, fire them if they're a creationist. An Iowa professor said, you should fail any student, no matter what the grade records indicate, if the professor discovers the student is a creationist. Furthermore, if the student's department should have the rights of retracting grades and possibly even degrees if the student becomes a creationist later. Wow, he's real open-minded about the subject, isn't he? Mr. Yefremov, David's dad, David does our video editing here. David's dad came to my house a couple years ago and laid his diploma on my desk. He's from Ukraine. He said, Dr. Hovind, here's my high school diploma. I thought, yeah, you got 5 kids, 2 in college, you know. Why are you handing me your high school diploma? But I didn't say that to him, you know. He said, you don't understand. When I was in Ukraine, my senior year in high school, he said, I had good grades. Here's my grade card. He showed me. Over there, they give them a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 and 5 is, you know, B's and A's. It was all 4s and 5s. He said, I had good grades. I said, yeah, I see that. He said, but we took a quiz, or test, before we can graduate. And one of the questions on the test was, do you believe in evolution? I said, no. They refused to let me graduate. I spoke last week in 4 different churches in Denver, 4 different Russian churches in Denver, Colorado. And I asked the folks, is it true, and most of them are, you know, first-generation immigrants straight from Ukraine or Russia. They've been here 8 or 10 years, most of them. I said, is it true that in Russia or Soviet Union they would not let you graduate from high school if you didn't believe in evolution? They said, oh yeah, that was common. A bunch of them raised their hand. I couldn't believe it. You don't believe in evolution? Sorry, you can't graduate. I guarantee that same type of discrimination is here in America. Now, it's a little more subtle, but there's an awful lot of people. The guy I did the debate with in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, 2 weeks ago, he and I debated 2 evolutionists. He was a PhD candidate, excellent grades all the way through. They refused to let him get his doctorate because he was a creationist, his doctorate in biology. Kicked him out of the program. I'd have sued him if it was me. I wouldn't have hesitated, okay? That's discrimination. But it happens. And we've got, when we get to question answer session, video number 7 of my series, we'll show you some of the people that I have met who have been discriminated against, or people who I've talked to or heard about, who just because they were creationists lost their jobs, lost their educational opportunities, lost government grant money. It's incredible. The communists learned years ago that they can get a few rich folks like Rockefeller particularly, and some others, to use their grant money as a means to advance the cause of communism. See, they will, it's manipulative. They will say, oh, we're going to do a study on such and here we will grant you $2,000 or $20,000 or $100,000 to study this. as long as it goes along with the evolution thinking. What do you think NASA is doing? How much of the NASA budget goes to try to prove life on other planets? Or how much of government funding goes to prove evolution? What if you suggested that we maybe have a grant to try to prove creation? Or to try to prove the biblical account of the flood? It wouldn't go very far at all, would it? Mr. Yefremov was finally sent his diploma 35 years late, because he did the voiceover on my first edition of my Russian series, sent the tapes over to his home country. The government officials there in his town watched the tapes and says, wow, this is one of our boys from our town. That's Eugene on there. Oh, we got a boy from our town, went to America, became a movie star. Send him his diploma. So they sent his diploma 35 years later. This book here, Des Griffin from Oregon, writes prolifically and extremely well-documented stuff on the New World Order. We sell this book. He's got lots of other books. There's his phone number here on the screen. But if you want to get a hold of this one or any of other stuff, if you want to really get into the study of the New World Order and how money ties in. Remember, the Bible says, love of money, root of all evil. Boy, it sure is too. I've decided, like many others, I love my country, but I fear my government. And I think that's the attitude we need to keep. Okay, communists also have rules for revolution. Now, my understanding is that this document of the 8 rules for revolution was discovered accidentally in 1919. I don't remember the whole story on this, but a fellow was shot and killed, and a communist was, and on his, in his pocket was this document, which turns out, I understand, has been verified from several sources, that this is the communist rules for revolution. Now, if you have information on that or find information, please send it to me, because I'll put it at the bottom of the screen, you know, where this was from. But I believe it was 1919, someplace in Germany, where a communist spy or soldier or somebody was shot and killed, and this document was discovered. Regardless of its authenticity, the concept is certainly correct. Here's what they plan to do. Number 1, corrupt the young. Take a look around America, see how things are going. Number 2, break down old moral virtues. Things are now shown on TV that you would have stormed the Capitol 20 years ago. I mean, if somebody, Elvis Presley was not allowed on quite a few TV shows because he shook his hips. I mean, that was just taboo. That was just 40 years ago. We've come a long way, and it's been downhill. All right? Number 3, communist rules of revolution encourage civil disorders and a soft government attitude toward crime. Boy, have we got that. Now they've got this 3 strikes and you're out. Well, how about 1 strike and you're out? See, the problem with our, I don't see, according to Scripture, where we shouldn't even have jails and prisons. We shouldn't even have them. How many people, what does it cost to lock a guy up for a year? You know, it's about $60,000, I think, average, somewhere in there, for each prisoner. The system in the Bible is very simple. If somebody steals something, he pays back 4 times as much. Well, that ought to be a deterrent, right? And for certain crimes, you're executed. That ought to be a deterrent, certainly to him anyway. And that system, is the beauty of it is its simplicity. It just flat works. Now, some have argued, well, look at, what if somebody gets executed for a crime, you know, capital punishment, and it turns out later they're innocent? That certainly has happened. The Bible had a very clear system. Nobody gets executed unless there's 2 witnesses. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So, if a murder is committed and there aren't 2 or 3 witnesses, you might prove the guy guilty of murder, and there might be some things you can do there, but he can't be executed without witnesses. So that way, that's a fail-safe method, I think. And Ray Comfort in California, my crazy friend Ray Comfort, has a great message on that. You can get a hold of raycomfort.com and get some of his. He's got tremendous messages on. You never met him, have you, Eric? You need to go out there and meet him. Next time you're in Southern California, you got to meet Ray Comfort. The guy's, he's crazy. Anyway, number 4, divide the people into hostile groups. Get them to argue about subjects like race or religion, you know. Break them up so they're arguing with each other. This makes them ineffective as a team, you know, and easier to take over for communism. Number 5, get the people's minds off their government. Focus their attention on athletics or sex. You know, in 1896, the first Olympics, only 311 athletes participated. How many channels right now? Let's say you're flipping through the channels and there are, what, 40 channels on a cable program. How many of those channels are devoted to athletics or sports of some kind? 4, 5, 6 whole channels just for sports? We've gone nuts on sports. Now, there's nothing wrong with sports necessarily, but the sports is a distraction. It's a tool to keep us distracted where we don't think about what's happening in our government. And it's working very well. Here's an advertisement for a 50-inch TV. It said, "Football is a religion. Build a nice church." And this is the attitude some folks have. Okay, number 6, get control of all the media, like CNN, the Communist News Network, with Ted Turner and Hanoi Jane. And praise God, I understand she's been saved. That's great, okay? Thrilled for that. Ted needs it. Ted needs it also. But controlling the media, can you imagine if you were told 60 or 80 or 100 years ago, your job is to get control of all the newspapers in America? Well, how would you do that? Well, they decided what they could do. The communists had a meeting, or the one world-minded folks had a meeting and said, you know, they looked at all the newspapers in America. Everybody was independently owned. And they said, you know, there's 25 key papers. If we can gain control of these 25 papers, we can probably either put the others out of business or cause them to have to merge with us or gradually buy them out, you know, competition. Rockefeller hated competition. He said competition is a sin. That was his attitude toward it. Rockefeller with Standard Oil had, I think, a 90% monopoly of gasoline sales in America before the government made him break it up broke up the monopolies. You studied that in history class. Rockefeller would go into if there were 10 gas stations, he would buy as many as he could, hopefully at least 6 or 7 or 8 of them. There was always a few, 2 or 3, that just refused. You know, this was my granddaddy's, you know, station, and we're not selling. I don't care what you offer us. We're not selling, okay? So if gas at that time was selling for 20 cents a gallon, Rockefeller would tell all the stations in town, the ones that he owned in that town, I want you to sell it for 16 cents a gallon, less than the cost of buying it. They'd say, boss, it costs us 17 cents to buy it. We sell it for 20. We make 3 cents. He'd say, sell it for 16 for the next 3 months. He would lose a lot of money for 3 months. What would happen to the other 3 stations? Go out of business. Now he owns every gas station in town. So guess what happens to the price? Up to 23 cents a gallon. You got to make the money back, you know, that we lost. I mean, that's the type of thing they did. And government got involved, right or wrong, I don't know, but they did, and tried to break up some of these monopolies. Okay, David Rockefeller of the Rockefeller dynasty, Grandpa John D. Rockefeller was the one who started this. John D. Rockefeller, if you read the story about John D., it'll just blow your mind. The guy lived to be 90 years old, but 90-some years old. He, absolutely ruthless man in many ways, especially particularly in business, but he started this Rockefeller dynasty by selling oil as medicine. Hey, take a spoonful of this crude oil, you know, drill it out of the ground. Drink a spoonful of oil will make you live longer, you know. Snake oil salesman. And developed a huge monopoly, a huge amount of money selling oil. That later led right into our modern medical movement. The AMA, the medical profession, is tied in strongly with the drug cartels, which is tied in strongly with the Rockefellers. And it all goes back to money. Anyway, let's read what he says here. Rockefeller is an international billionaire, a humanist, a CFR kingpin. That's the Council of Foreign Relations, okay, the kingpin. He's a founder of the Trilateral Commission, a world order godfather, and in all probability the high school graduate voted most likely to be hanged for treason. He voiced his praise of the controlled U.S. media for keeping their oath not to divulge the globalist plans to the public. Speaking to his fellow conspirators at a meeting in 1991 in Baden, Germany, one of the famous Bilderberger meetings. How many have ever heard of the Bilderbergers before? Okay. This is a group of folks, they meet once a year to lay plans for how can we gain more control of the world. Rockefeller said, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. He went on to explain, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranatural means above national, supranational, sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodeterminism practiced in past centuries. What he says here is, we'd be better off with a world government with bankers, like himself, in charge, instead of every nation running their own people. His mentality was, we need a one world government. It's always been that way, and they work toward that very hard. And Rockefeller and their clan have been one of the primary people involved in aiding communism. They kept communism alive because you got to have an enemy to justify all this big arms race we got going on here. Pretty soon people get sick and tired of paying all this money for, you know, missiles and submarines and aircraft carriers when, for what, you know? There's no enemy. Many wars could not have been fought if we hadn't gone off, if it weren't for going off the gold standard. During the Civil War, when they're on the gold standard, you got to have gold, you just can't buy ammo otherwise. Gold and silver. You got to have real money. Well, if all you got to do is crank up the printing press and print more paper money, well, that's simple to do. There's an awful lot of tragedy in the world. A lot of people died in wars that could not have been fought were it not for this love of money stuff we talked about earlier. Okay, here's what some of the news media anchors have said, like Richard Cohen, senior producer of CBS Political News. He said, we're going to impose our agenda on the coverage by dealing with the issues and subjects we choose to deal with. Let me stop right there. Anytime you see something in the news for quite a while that's really kind of stupid, like the O.J. Simpson thing, almost a year of all kinds of coverage on O.J. Simpson, anytime you see that, antennas ought to go up and you ought to think, okay, what are they trying to cover up? What they were covering up in that case was Bill Clinton's trying to give China most favored nation status and trying to give a Los Angeles port to China. They were going to allow the communist Chinese to have some property in Los Angeles. Well, guess what they would do? They would bring in drugs by the boatload. So many folks that have whole ministries dealing with what's happening, you know, United Nations, and Chuck Baldwin does a great job on that. You heard me on his program the other day. He said, he can give you lots more information on this. Okay, here's President of CBS News, Richard Salant, former president. He said, our job is to give people not what they want, but what we decide they ought to have. Manage the news for them, just like in the Soviet Union. The New York Times is deliberately pitched to the liberal, that's socialist, point of view. New York Times, certainly a liberal paper. News reporters are certainly liberal and left of center, Walter Cronkite said. He should know, he's one of them. Barbara Walters said, the news media in general are liberals, socialists. Number 7, rules for revolution, destroy people's faith in their leaders. Wasn't hard to do here for the last 10 years, was it? Joseph Stalin is this is attributed to him. I can't prove that he said this, but many people say that's right. Okay. He said, those who cast the votes decide nothing. Those who count the votes decide everything. A man spoke here in Pensacola at the Shoney's Inn out Highway 10, Interstate 10, you know, and by Shoney's restaurant. He spoke several years ago on voter fraud. I went out to hear him speak. He said that they had gone, during the primary, when Pat Buchanan was running to be presidential candidate, they suspected voter fraud because every place the votes were hand counted, Buchanan won. If the computer counted them, Bob Dole won. So he said that they went to some place where they have these voting machines. After the primary's over, Bob Dole won, you know, and then lost the presidential race. They went to this place and they got 10 ballots and marked them all. Pat Buchanan, Pat Buchanan, Pat Buchanan. Fed them into the machine. 6 of them registered for Bob Dole. Now, somebody who has no morals, like Bill Clinton, they're not above this. Figure out some way to get into the voting system and control it. And all the people think, well, I voted for the right guy. Yeah, but your vote didn't do anything. So really, all you need is a few people in key places who can control who's counting the votes or how they're counted. Or better yet, what if you just got to the people in Mexico that create the voting software that counts the votes? That the, computer's going to count it? Well, computers, garbage in, garbage out. Suppose you could write the software in such a way that all you had to do was give it a secret code and it would make the election come out the way you wanted it. Many people think that is what's happened. That has been what has happened here in America. Number 8, cause the registration of all firearms. You want to control a country, you have to have people unarmed. All the lions got together for a conference one day and voted that, certain animals have horns that are just too dangerous. They should not be allowed to have horns that are quite that dangerous. We should trim those horns way back and round them off and maybe put some safety tips on the end. But wouldn't the lions all vote for a bill like that? Sure. Of course they would. What's happening is we've got a bunch of people who want a one-world government. They're meeting trying to put rules and regulations on gun control. And their motive is make us unable to defend ourselves. We'll talk a little bit more about gun control right after a quick break here and show you the Hovind attitude toward gun control coming up soon. Thank you. All right, let's talk about gun control. It is attributed to Vladimir Lenin that he said, one person with a gun can control 100 people without one. All you got to do is look at any concentration camp or prison, and you see this is exactly correct. Picture this scenario. You're in the bank waiting to cash a check or something. A guy walks in with a gun and says, everybody lay on the floor. Well, everybody lays on the floor. He has the gun. Now, picture this scenario. Everybody in the bank has a gun. Everybody's carrying a concealed weapon. They don't want to hurt anybody. They just want to protect themselves just in case, so they're all carrying a concealed weapon, like I do most of the time. Somebody walks into the bank, says, everybody lay on the floor. So 100 people pull out their gun. Sir, you lay on the floor. Right? That's all it takes. Gun control is not about guns, it's about control. Lenin called for disarming the people. Stalin called for gun control. Hitler called for gun control. See, gun control goes back to the basic idea of, I have power over you. I have the gun, you don't. You do what I say. I am in control, which goes back to Satan's basic idea of, hey, ye shall be as gods. And whoever has the power, has the control, they feel like they are God in that situation. And the American government has done a wonderful job of getting bigger and better weapons, and we can certainly control during wartime. We dominate. You guys are in the military, and I think our military system is wonderful. It's great. But what if the wrong people get in charge of it? Then we're going to dominate who? Who gets dominated? Us. Yeah. It's going to be used on us. There's a website about this, members.localnet.com /BobG/IFA6 if you want to get more information on that. Don Boys, a good friend of mine, was a member of Indiana House Representatives, lives in Ringgold, Georgia, near Chattanooga, Tennessee. He travels and speaks on creation, and really, really smart fella. He said gun control is not about guns, but it's about control. He said you might be a liberal if you don't trust honest Americans with automatic weapons, but you do trust the federal government with them. He said you might be a liberal if you think guns are the cause of crime, but you don't think matches are the cause of arson. Think about that. You might be a liberal if you think the death penalty is government-sanctioned killing, but you don't think a prison sentence is government-sanctioned kidnapping. That is a good one. You guys are a thinker. I love the way he thinks, I say, wow, why didn't I think of that, The Second Amendment to the Constitution was very clear. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So if Congress passes a law that bans people from owning machine guns, that law is null and void. It is a violation of the Second Amendment. A law is null and void from the moment it is passed if it violates the Constitution. So you don't have to wait until it's proven unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional right away. You cannot violate the Constitution. So no matter what laws they pass, it doesn't matter because the Constitution takes precedence over all of this. The purpose of the Second Amendment was not so we can go duck hunting. It's so we can protect ourselves from our own government if need be. I saw the videotape of a lady testifying before Congress. They were debating about gun control. She sat there in front of all these guys, you know, these senators who wanted gun control, and she said, I was in the restaurant in Texas when the man came in shooting people. Was that Luby's restaurant? Yeah. She said, I was in there with my mom and dad. They were having their 40th anniversary. Dad had taken mom out for 40th anniversary dinner. The guy came in, began shooting people, shot my father in the head. He was laying there dying, and my mom was holding him in her hands, and the guy's still going around shooting people. And I said, Mom, he's not looking. Let's get out of here. And we had a chance to escape. So I grabbed Mom, pulled on her, and said, let's go, Mom. And she said, I ran out the door. I turned around and realized Mom hadn't come with me. The gunman went over, shot my mom point blank in the head and killed her. She said, I'm not mad at the guns. She said, and you guys are debating on gun control. Please do not vote for any gun control. We don't need gun control. We need criminal control. She said, we need guns in America. The purpose of the Second Amendment was so that we can protect ourselves from you guys. And she pointed right to him. I thought, yay, somebody finally figured out why we have the Second Amendment. The purpose of the Second Amendment is the last defense if the government goes bad. The Founding Fathers were sharp. They had just come out under the rule of King George. And the only way to keep government in line is for government to fear the people. See, if the people fear their government, you now have tyranny. If the government fears the people, you can have freedom. The government ought to be afraid to pass laws and afraid to do things that are unconstitutional because there's too many patriots out there that love their country and love their freedom. Many animals that eat grass have big horns. What do you need horns for when you're eating grass? Does that help him eat the grass? No. All he wants to do is eat the grass, right? But the lion keeps jumping on his back. He doesn't have the horns to help him eat the grass. He has the horns to keep the lion off his back so that he can just eat the grass. We've always had guns around our house, lots of them, and they're always loaded. I didn't tell my kids, pretend like it's loaded. It was loaded. It is. An unloaded gun is just a club. And when I pick it up, if I got to shoot it, I want to be ready to shoot it. I don't want to say, hold on, sir, I got to find my bullets. Like Barney, where's my bullet? Man, they're in it. They're ready to fire. Pick it up, flip the safety off, and hit the trigger, and go, and there's guns everywhere. And my kids have grown up with that, and they started shooting when they were 3 years old. I wanted them to be good shots. They knew real well, don't touch that gun or Daddy is going to spank you, and you won't forget that one for a long time. I tell you when you can touch the gun, okay? I don't want to shoot anybody. Honestly, I don't. Never have. Hope I never have to. I have guns because there are some people that want to come, hurt my family. I just want to protect my family, that's all. I'm like the bull. I don't want to hurt anybody. I just want to eat the grass, but if you jump on my back, you're going to get it. Period. I think that's the right and godly attitude. As I understand Scripture, there are two kinds of wars, basically. There are wars of aggression, where you're trying to take over somebody else's property. That's wrong. Then there are wars where you just have to defend yourself because somebody else is having a war of aggression against you. Now, if you are the aggressor trying to take somebody else's land, you're wrong. Okay? They ought to shoot you. They have a right to shoot you. It's called self-defense. But if somebody's coming to take away my property or harm my wife or my children, I have a right to defend myself. That's a universal common sense law, the right to self-defense. And that's what guns are about. And gun control is going to be slow, gradual choking down where you no longer have the ability to defend yourself. The Lions held a conference to outlaw horns on animals. They said it was dangerous to allow these untrained animals to have such dangerous weapons. They cited examples where some animals had been accidentally harmed by horns. We need to outlaw horns on the animals. Well, why would the Lions hold a conference like that, do you think? Obviously, they have an ulterior motive, don't they? Remember when the kids got shot in Colorado? Right away, the liberal media jumped on the gun control issue, didn't they? Those kids broke 18 gun laws breaking into that school, or going into that school, shooting everybody. They violated 18 gun laws. Do you think 2 more gun laws would have helped? How about 10 more? Maybe 20 more? They don't care. Criminals don't care about the laws you pass. The purpose of those laws is only to get the honest citizens to become criminals by breaking those laws. Liberal media jumped on gun control. You know, maybe the real issue is, should we have public schools? Should we teach the kids evolution? That's what caused that gun control thing, or caused the Columbine shooting. Those 2 kids were strong believers in evolution. They did the shooting on Adolf Hitler's birthday. We'll get into more on Hitler in a little bit. They shot Isaiah Shoals just because he was black. They shot Cassie just because she believed in God. Eric's t-shirt said, "Natural selection." They spoke German to each other in the hallway. Nothing wrong with German, ich spreche ein klein bisschen Deutsch. But this was a evolution. Evolution was the foundation philosophy behind what happened at Columbine High School. I'm convinced of that. See, blaming guns for Columbine is like blaming spoons for Rosie O'Donnell being fat. It is not the spoon's fault. Okay? And it's not the gun's fault that those kids got shot. It's the person's fault, okay? I love that. Somebody sent me that picture of the back of a van. Some guy driving around with that on there. It's so good. I thought, why didn't I think of that? You know? Maybe the real issue is, should certain criminals be publicly executed? If executions were swift and public. In the Bible, it's a pretty neat system. The offended person gets to be involved. You throw the first stone. I mean, if somebody murdered your wife or husband or kids, there's a normal, natural anger that gets inside of people. That's normal. I'm angry. Look what they did to me. And the proper godly response, the release of that, God knows, He made people, He knows what we're built like. He did the whole thing, okay? It gives a relief, a release of this tension when you can see that person who did that harm to your family executed. Should you choose to be involved in it? I want to flip the switch. Okay. I want to throw the first stone. This gets the anger out. Maybe you saw the movie Forrest Gump, you know, where the lady at the end of the movie, she's throwing rocks at that house, you know, that her dad molested her in. And old Forrest said, sometimes there just aren't enough rocks, you know. There's just something in people that they just want to get closure. And this causes closure. How many people right now tonight, they were harmed, or someone in their family was harmed, the person who harmed them is sitting in jail. That person tonight is a nervous wreck, thinking that person in jail might escape. Right? How many women have been raped? The guy who raped them is in prison, scheduled for release today. I sat yesterday and had dinner with 3 Arkansas representatives, and they were talking about, you know, this. They're talking about, one of the guys introduced a law to make rape a capital offense where you get executed. Execute people for rape. And one of the other congressmen says, well, that didn't take away their life. He said, yeah, it did. That did take away their life. Think about it. Yes, it does. Okay, maybe we should think about, should all law-abiding citizens be required to carry guns to protect themselves? Suppose every teacher in Columbine High School was required to be armed and the kids all knew it. Do you think they would have gone down the hall shooting everybody? No. One of the auto parts places, it wasn't AutoZone, but DAPS or one of those, I forget, national chains, decided that they're going to have signs put on all their doors, no guns allowed. No guns allowed on these premises. What does that sign say to a criminal? That says, rob me. Doesn't it? Duh. You don't need to be a genius to figure it out. And so the National Rifle Association, NRA, or else the Gun Owners of America, which is even a more conservative properly thought out organization than National NRA, Gun Owners of America, GOA. I'm not a member of either group. I love what they do. I'm just not a member of any groups except my church. That's all I got time for. But they wrote to them and said, we're going to tell all of our people not to buy at your store. Gun owners are people, they aren't the ones committing the crimes. They're the ones wanting to defend themselves. They just want to eat the grass. They just have the horns just in case, That's all. Hitler is reported to have said, now I've taken some criticism over this quote because some people say, I searched Hitler's writings and couldn't find this. I cannot prove that he said this, okay? I've tried desperately to find the evidence of this. I've had some people tell me, oh yes, it's absolutely true. Hitler said that. Other people said, well, it hasn't been proven yet. Whether the quote is legitimate or not, I don't know. The philosophy certainly is, okay? It is reported that Hitler said in 1935, this year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation had full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, boy were they, and the world will follow our lead into the future. 1935. Janet Reno said, gun registration is not enough. She said, waiting periods are only a step. Registration is only a step. The prohibition of private firearms is the goal. Howard Metzenbaum, former senator from Ohio, said, what good does it do to ban some guns? All guns should be banned. Wait till Howard gets robbed a few times. He'll change his tune, right? Sarah Brady, you've heard of the Brady Bill? Sarah Brady said, our task of creating a totally socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist have been totally disarmed. You have to disarm your enemy. What's the first thing you do in war? You conquer somebody, you beat them, everybody surrenders. Take away their guns. Desert Storm. Thousands of Iraqis surrendered. Did they let them keep their weapons? No. You got a couple of Marines with machine guns can guard a couple of thousand Iraqis that are unarmed. Right? Bill Clinton, former President of the United States of America, people say, oh, why did you misspell it on there? Oh, no, it's not misspelled. He's a communist through and through, okay? Clinton's philosophy is certainly communistic. Hillary's worse. Clinton said, and we should, then every community in the country could start doing major weapons sweeps and then destroying the weapons, not selling them. The idea is to destroy the weapons. Australia had gun control. In the first 12 months after Australian gun owners surrendered their guns, this was a couple years ago, they surrendered 640,000 personal firearms. They were destroyed. Cost the government $500 million to destroy the guns in Australia. Homicides nationwide went up 3.2% after gun control. Assaults are up 8%. Armed robberies are up 44%. Well, I thought they took away the guns. How can you have armed robberies? Well, duh. You think the criminals are going to surrender their guns? Are you dumb in any other area? In the state of Victoria, homicides with firearms went up 300%. Figures over the previous 25 years show a steady decrease in armed robbery with firearms. There's been a dramatic increase in break-ins and assaults of the elderly since they banned the guns. What's the average criminal thinking? Let's see, nobody has guns anymore. Everybody's an easy target, right? In 1911, Turkey established gun control. For the next 6 years, 1.5 million Armenians, unable to defend themselves, were rounded up and exterminated, killed. 1929, Soviet Union established gun control. Over the next 30 years, 20 million dissidents, unable to defend themselves, were rounded up and exterminated. 20 million people. Do you know how many that is? Jews are prohibited from carrying firearms and ammunition according to a Nazi gun control decree in 1938. Germany established gun control in 1938. They had gun registration first. Now gun control. They decide who gets them. 1939 to 1945, 13 million Jews and others were unable to defend themselves and were rounded up and exterminated. Brian works in our ministry. He can give you lots of details on what happened here, but when the Warsaw Ghetto decided, they're killing us, let's go fight them. They only had like 5 guns. Most of the Jews had never touched a gun, had no idea how to use one. Only a few people even knew how to use them. They put up a horrendous fight against the Nazis, I mean, in an extremely lousy situation. They're going to get killed anyway. Go down fighting, okay? China established gun control in 1935, and for the next few years, 20 million political dissidents unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. Guatemala established gun control in 1964. Over the next 16 years, 100,000 Mayan Indians unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. Uganda established gun control in 1970. For the next 8 years, 300,000 Christians unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. Cambodia established gun control in 1956. 1975 to 77, 1 million educated people unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. Defenseless people rounded up and exterminated in the 20th century because of gun control, 56 million. Next time someone talks in favor of gun control, ask them, who do you want to round up and exterminate? With guns, we are citizens. Without guns, we are subjects. Our founding fathers were sharp. They said, look, you have to allow people to defend themselves. There are many people in our government who have a communist philosophy, whether they know it or not. They might not even know it. But they do have a communist philosophy which leads right to this idea, you know, we really ought to take away everybody's guns. Only the UN should have guns because we can trust them. Oh, yeah, right. Okay. The plan is very simple. The communists have used this for years. You create a crisis, and then you bring in your solution. Hitler blew up the government building, the Reichstag. He blew it up himself, or had his people blow it up. And then he said, wow, look at this, terrorists, that means we need more gun control. Everything that happened at Waco and at Oklahoma City was all part of the same thing. It was purposely done to cause people to panic and give up their rights and establish more gun control. Long stories can be told about that, okay? Communist definition of peace is simply the absence of resistance. When everybody quits fighting, then we have peace. Surrender your guns and we'll be fine. Karl Marx, the father of communism, wanted to dedicate his book to Charles Darwin. He sent a copy of his book, Das Kapital, to Charles Darwin, and on the front page he wrote, dedicated to Charles Darwin from a sincere admirer, Karl Marx, 1873. Karl Marx knew full well communism couldn't survive without evolution as a philosophical base. I read somewhere, I don't remember, I think it's in The Long War Against God, Karl Marx, when he read Darwin's book, he wrote a letter to Engels, who supplied all of his money, because Marx was a loser, never worked a day in his life. He said, Engels, I just read this book by Darwin. This is perfect to justify our theories of communism. Well, all through his speeches, Karl Marx referred to evolution. Notice this. Marx often bowled over opposition with mountain-moving declarations of superconfidence. Historical evolution is on your side, he shouted to followers. Capitalism, brought into being by the laws of historical evolution, will be destroyed by those same laws. All you got to do is read through Karl Marx's stuff and you'll see him referring to evolution over and over again. This was the philosophy. Comrade Stalin, communist, entered school. He went to a Christian school as a child. While still a pupil at the ecclesiastical school, Comrade Stalin developed a critical mind and revolutionary sentiments. He began to read Darwin and became an atheist. Now, Joseph Stalin read that book. That changed his life forever. Here he is going to a Christian school, became a communist, became a revolutionary, became an evolutionist. Missionaries have said when they work in a country like China, when the communists came in and took over China, missionaries were all over China. They reported the first thing the communists came into the villages and did was start teaching the kids evolution. They didn't teach them communism, taught them evolution first. You got to have evolution first, and then you can teach communism. First you got to take away God, then put man in his place. Joseph Stalin killed between 60 and 100 million of his own people. You ought to read any of the books by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I read the book Gulag Archipelago, Gulag. Gulag Archipelago. It's like 900 and some pages. Somebody said, Brother Hovind, I want you to read this book. It's great. I thought, yeah, right. I read 2 books a week as it is, and I'm swamped. I don't have any more time. I said, okay, I'll just read a few pages. I couldn't put it down. 900 pages. This guy lived in the concentration camps. He was there for 15 years. He now, I think, is still alive, isn't he, in Vermont? He's getting pretty old. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, has written extensively about communism, life under Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin's daughter became a Christian. Interesting. When the communists attacked Poland during World War II, see, Germany and Russia had an agreement that they wouldn't fight. Hitler had no plans of keeping that agreement because he thought the Slavic people were half Aryan, half ape. We'll show you in a minute about that. But when they attacked Poland, the Polish army put up an incredible, ferocious resistance, but they were just outnumbered and outgunned. It was just absolutely no chance of winning. But like Churchill said, sometimes it's better to fight when there's no chance of winning than to be slaves. It's better to see it coming a few years ahead of time, you know. But hey, if it's too late, go down with the fight, okay? Suppose every Jew that was being captured to take off to the concentration camps had put up a fight and killed one Nazi or tried to kill one Nazi. Just suppose, you know, maybe the outcome would have been a little different. They ended up slaughtering these Polish people, and they captured thousands and thousands of prisoners. They had 14,700 prisoners at one place, the officers in the Polish army. They said to Stalin, what should we do with them? We got all these 14,700 Polish officers. He said, execute them. They're Poles. They're inferior species. The Russians finally admitted this in 1993, but they did it clear back in 1942 or 41, 42. They took all these prisoners, Polish officers, put hoods over their heads, tied their hands behind their back, and then jerked them up as hard as they could and wrapped the rope around the hood. So the harder you pull down, the more you choke yourself. Took them out to the woods, Katyn Forest, and shot them in the back of the head. 14,700 officers. You say, oh, that's terrible. What about the Geneva Convention? The Geneva Convention says you can't do that. You've got to treat your prisoners a certain way. Well, duh. If you're a communist, there's no God. What motivation would you have to keep your word on a convention? If a lion makes a treaty with a lamb, should the lamb get excited? Hey, Mr. Lion, you promised you wouldn't hurt me. I got this piece of paper right here. Well, wait till the lion gets hungry and see how much that paper does. Okay? And here we got these idiots in our government making treaties with the communists, you know, SALT treaties and, you know, strategic arms limitation talks and stuff like that. Absolutely dumb. People have said, well, the communists, you know, they're hurting over there. The economy's bad. You know, we got to support their economy. Okay, well, let's buy their tanks and their battleships at 10 cents on the dollar. You got paid $40 million for that? We'll give you $4 million. Well, forget it, it's worth $40 million. Well, that's okay. When you get hungry, come see us. You can't eat that tank, you know. Pol Pot, dictator in Cambodia, executed 1/3 of his entire population. The movie Killing Fields is about this. It's a bad movie, but it truly depicts what happened. People were killed just because they wore glasses. Because he figured, oh, you wear glasses? You must know how to read. You're educated. That's what communism did to Cambodia. The guy that works at Camera America, a year ago, and I was in there one time. He may not still work there. I said, hey, he just had a slight accent. I said, where are you from? He said, Cambodia. I said, really? How'd you get to America? He said, I barely escaped. He said, everybody in my family was killed. Lost my mother, my father, my brothers, my sisters, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents. I'm the only survivor. Here in Pensacola, working at Camera America. In 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Pol Pot was the leader, they began executing people. Anybody that opposed him in any way. By the way, Pol Pot is still on the loose, last I heard. Still setting landmines and bombs all over the area, blowing up kids as they walk through the woods. Killed 1/3 of the entire population. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records under genocide. Mass genocide. The communists took over China in 1949 with American help, by the way. The capitalists helped the communists take over China. Long story behind that. They began executing Christians because Christians don't fit in well with New World Order type governments. They killed 15,000 a month. 60 million Chinese were killed by their own government. And if there's a takeover in America, you'll see the same type of slaughter here of American citizens by the American government. And there's all sorts of people who have been doing research on this about the concentration camps that are already being built. And the plans already being laid at the Amtrak station in Indianapolis, where they remodeled that to be a transportation hub to bring the people in when they don't go along with the system. We'll cover more on that next week. We'll take up more about communism and how it ties in with Nazism and Adolf Hitler and his book, Mein Kampf. You want to read something interesting, you ought to read Hitler's book, what he wrote about his philosophy of life. We'll see how that affected things starting next week. Communism, evolution, Nazism, it all ties together, folks. It's all rejecting God. See you next week. All right, welcome to, I think it's session 8, isn't it, of CSE 103. This will be our politically incorrect sessions on the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism because of the evolution theory. We've got several things, too much to discuss tonight than we'll ever get through. Tonight we're going to start talking about how evolution is the foundation philosophy for Nazism. Hitler came to power because of American financiers' help. They wanted a war, they wanted an enemy, and Bill Still, I didn't have Bill Still's other book here, The Money Masters, but he also wrote this one, On the Horns of the Beast, about the Federal Reserve. Bill Still wrote a book called The Money Masters, where he describes in great detail how Hitler was given the money to come to power through the American bankers to help him rise to power to create another war, because who wins every war? The bankers. Right. Loan money to both sides, you win every time. Mussolini, the Italian dictator, was strongly influenced by the evolution philosophy. He thought the Italians were the superior race. In 1936, Italy invaded Ethiopia. Wanted to take over Ethiopia, Africa. They slaughtered them. Here's the Ethiopians with their spears and their swords against the Italians with tanks and airplanes. It was just a merciless slaughter. After all, they're just black. They got to be inferior. That's the thinking that was motivated by, or that's the philosophy behind Mussolini's thinking. Hitler and Mussolini, of course, were allies for some of the war till Mussolini lost. Hitler thought the German race was superior, and they deserved to rule the world. Hitler said, by the way, Sir Arthur Keith is the same guy who wrote the book, he wrote the foreword to Darwin's book when it was republished. Darwin's 100-year anniversary book, the 1959 edition, which we have, Eric, they asked Arthur Keith to write the foreword to it because he was such a great famous evolutionist. Keith said, "The German Führer has consistently sought to make the practice of Germany conform to the theory of evolution." All you need to do is read Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, which I was reading right here, and you will see Hitler's racism all through this thing. It's really pretty incredible. His philosophy really permeates just about every page of the book, his racist philosophy, thinking the German race is superior. It's pretty scary to read this, realizing how many people followed Hitler. And then, of course, what was the church doing? How could they fall for such a thing? Marvin Lutzer, the president of Moody Bible Institute, has written a great book, Hitler's Cross. What was the church doing? Why didn't the church oppose Hitler? If the Christians just would have stood up against him, they could have done, could have stopped him. The church swallowed it too. He goes through how the church was deceived. We'll get into more later. In Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, here on page 286, depending which edition you have, some editions it's other pages, but on page 286, Hitler said, "No more than nature desires the mating of weaker with stronger individuals, even less does she desire the blending of a higher with a lower race. Since if she did, her whole work of higher breeding over perhaps hundreds of thousands of years might be ruined with one blow." Historical experience offers countless proofs of this. It shows with terrifying clarity that in every mingling of Aryan blood with that of lower peoples, the result was the end of a cultured people. Hitler somehow really honestly thought that the Aryan race was superior. They were the cultured people of the world, and the best thing that could happen to the world would be to kill everybody else. To let the Aryans succeed, okay, and take over. If you read this book, While 6 Million Died, this one, it absolutely will blow your mind of what were the people in the rest of the world doing. As I read this one, it just brought tears to my eyes over and over to realize how many people were duped by Hitler. In 1907, the United States had an immigration quota. Here's what this book says on page 133. Scientifically hazy theories of biological superiority and inferiority of various European races now began to dominate the formulation for immigration policy. In this atmosphere, the United States government appointed a 9-man immigration commission in 1907. After 3 years of work by a staff of 300 at a cost of $1 million back in 1907, that's a lot more money than it is now, the commission published a 42-volume report. This massive work supported the notion that Southern and Eastern Europeans were racially inferior to Northern and Western Europeans. So if you come from Southern or Eastern Europe, they thought you were racially inferior. That was a $1 million study done by the United States government in 1907. So America was just as racist. In this book, on page 204, they tell the story how Hitler offered to send the Jews to anybody who would take them. He said, okay, you think we're being mean to the Jews here? You want them? Hitler said, I'll pay for them to come to your place. We'll send them on luxury ships. Roosevelt refused to allow them to come to America. The immigration quotas in America were such that, hey, we don't want any Jews. Now, they let a few come in, but the problem was you had to have $10,000 to come into America because they didn't want you to be a burden on the American system. Hitler, though, said, you can leave Germany if you want, but you can only take $4 with you. Well, that's pretty rough to start off with $4 and end up with 10,000 by the time you go on a 2-week trip across the ocean. So they were just really stuck. They tell the story in here of the 900 and some Jews who run a boat that came to Havana, Cuba, and begged to be released. They went into the harbor. Here they could see all their relatives. You know, please let them off the boat. This is before Cuba was communist, okay? Please let them off the boat. Cuban officials refused. So they sailed up to Miami. They said, would you please let us come? They're killing the Jews over there in Germany. Miami officials said, no, you can't get off here. They sailed up and down the coast of the United States begging for asylum and were refused at every port in America. What happened to the Jews, you're not going to understand World War II until you understand, while 6 million died, what were people thinking? Some people were thinking, well, they're inferior species. It goes right back to the evolution theory. When Jesse Owens won the Olympics, won, I think, 7 gold medals, or 9 gold medals, whatever it was, in 1936, Hitler walked out of the stadium. He said, it's unfair to make my men race against this animal. Jesse Owens said, I wasn't invited to shake hands with Hitler, but I wasn't invited to the White House to shake hands with the president either. He said, it's all right with me. I didn't go to Berlin to shake hands with him anyway. All I know is I'm here now and Hitler isn't. Jesse Owens, the black American athlete. Hitler's hit list, I discovered this when I was reading in Keene State, New Hampshire. They've got a section of the library up there at the Keene State University that is all books just about Hitler and the Holocaust. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen because I love to read about Hitler and the Holocaust, you know. They got this huge section of the library, all books about Hitler. So I went in there, had 6 hours to spare before my next meeting. You know, I had to speak somewhere at a church that evening. And I asked, they've got a librarian just in charge of that section. Or they did have it, I don't know if they still do. But I said, sir, why did Hitler kill the Jews? You know, why not somebody else? Well, he did kill a lot of people, but why did he hate the Jews so bad? For the next 6 hours, that guy brought me book after book after book. He said, oh, well, here, you can get it figured out from this and from this and from this. And we found Hitler's hit list. Why the Jews? You know, why not the Italians or the Spanish or the French? Or why Jews? Hitler thought the blonde-haired, blue-eyed the Norwegians, were close to pure Aryan. Make sure you take note of that. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, Norwegian. Vårde står det till idag. You know, ja, sure, you betcha. Ofta. And he thought the Germans were blue-eyed or brown-eyed. That's less desirable. Blue eyes is the most desirable. Hey, they're mostly Aryan. It was a big deal in Germany to go around and check people's eyes to see what color they were. They had charts the doctors would use to see how much Aryan you were, what percentage Aryan. How many have seen that stuff before on TV, the kind of thing they did with checking the eyes, even checking, they call it phrenology, I believe, measuring the dimensions of the skull, different dimensions of the skull to find out how close to pure Aryan they were. He thought the Mediterraneans were slightly Aryan, the Slavic, half Aryan, half ape. Brother Pratsuk, you Slavic? Hitler thought you were half ape, half Aryan. He said the Orientals are slightly ape, the black Africans are mostly ape, and the Jews are close to pure ape. From the book Hitler Movement, page 107. The reason Hitler killed the Jews was because of his philosophy, his belief that they were an inferior species. And he thought, look, they're taking up valuable space that really belongs to the Germans. And as you read through his book, Mein Kampf, it's just scary to think that this guy thought this, okay? And then he hid behind the cloak of Christianity. He was a Catholic, and he wanted people to think, well, I'm doing this in the name of God to, purify the race. Because some renegade Catholic priest back in 1912, I believe, wrote a book claiming that, that years ago there were just two races, the apes and the Aryans. And they intermingled. And now we have a whole range of people, everything from ape to Aryan and everything in between. And we need to just eliminate all these inferior half-breeds and allow only the Aryans to survive. Hitler read that, believed it, and acted it out. Probably 13 million people died because of World War II. 6 million Jews were slaughtered in the camps. One of the Jewish doctors who survived the Holocaust later said, "There's a difference between those who look upon their fellow human beings as common creatures of a common creator and those who look upon them as a conglomerate of biologicals and chemicals." Powerful statement here. If you look at somebody else and say, wow, God made this person, that makes you think of him one way. If you look at him through the eyes of a person who believes in evolution, hey, they're nothing but chemicals that got together by chance. That's what evolution teaches. This doctor ought to know. He was in the prison camp, okay? Now, the Jewish Talmud, this is something, Eric, you need to get down because the Jewish, the Torah is the same Old Testament as we have. Okay. T-O-R-A-H, okay? Yeah, I don't know of any differences. There may be some little stuff, but very, very, very similar. The Talmud is a book of Jewish writers writing their ideas. It is not the Bible. So you've got to be real cautious if you get into a discussion if you're talking about the Talmud, which is not good, or the Torah, which is perfectly fine. The Jewish Talmud teaches that non-Jews are to be exterminated. See, they're just as racist as anybody else. They think they're superior. In the section of the Talmud called Yabamoth 98a, it says, all Gentile children are animals. In the minor Tractus, Sophorum 15, Rule 10, even the best of the Gentiles should all be killed. Nice guy, huh? Yeah. Okay. You want to get the website Hoffman-info.com. He's got a ton of stuff on the Talmud. I met him when I was out in speaking to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, out in that region. I don't think it's possible to fully comprehend what happened in World War II and what caused all this suffering until you see how evolution ties in. The more I read on Hitler, and I read a lot on Hitler just to keep my blood boiling, and to try to understand why did he do this, the more it makes me angry that we are paying to have this same philosophy of evolution taught to our kids in this town today. They learned this. During World War II, I've had several people tell me this is true. I cannot document it. I'll just tell you what Milton Cooper said in his book, which I have in there, Behold a Pale Horse. He said during World War II, a Polish salesman working for I.G. Farben Chemical Company. By the way, I.G. Farben Chemical Company was tied in with Rockefeller over here in America. The Rockefeller Standard Oil. Chemical company, remember, love of money, root of all evil. Okay. This guy, Polish salesman, sold cyanide gas, Zyklon B, and malathion to the Nazis to help exterminate the Jews at Auschwitz. After the war, he feared for his life, so he joined the Catholic Church and became a priest, 1946. In 1958, he was ordained as Poland's youngest bishop. After 30 days, the reigning pope was assassinated, and he became Pope John Paul II, the current pope right now. Interesting story. I want to get more documentation on that. Milton Cooper does a tremendous amount of research, and I know of no reason to doubt what he said, but so far I've been unable to prove this story is true, but it might be something you might want to watch for if you've seen it.
Old guy, the Pope.
Yep. That's the former cyanide salesman. What better place to hide than right out in the open? As I study and read on what happened with Hitler and the Holocaust, I'm constantly tying it in with why he did what he did. You know, what he did was horrible, but why? What would motivate a guy to do that? And I go back to his thinking. What you believe determines how you behave. When I read books like Peace Child and Eternity in Their Hearts, and Jan, have you read those missionary stories? Those natives over there in Papua New Guinea, you know, they teach their kids, now if you kill somebody in battle, be sure to cut off his head and eat the brains because you'll get his spirit. Well, of course, that's stupid, but if you tell that to a kid all his life when he's growing up, guess what he's going to do when he gets into battle? People do some pretty dumb things because of what they believe. If you believe the Jews are inferior, they're just animals, and you're the superior, you know, Aryan race, well then, it's really best to eliminate them. That's what happened here, Hitler and the Holocaust. So, as you read stories on what happened, you better tie it in with evolution. I've been to Germany 3 times, visited the Flossburg concentration camp. That's where they cut the stone out to make the big theater at Nuremberg. And I stood there at the theater and just wept and cried as I walked around this massive stone theater. Here I'm walking on these stones, and I had just been to the Flossburg concentration camp and seen the mine where the Jews, here they were barely fed enough to stay alive. You have to work 12 hours a day carrying these huge granite slabs up and down these steps. And if you fall over, they shoot you and get another one, because after all, they're bringing new ones in all the time. They worked them literally to death. That was the intention. Get as much work out of them as you could, work them until they drop, then bring in another one. Here's a pile of shoes from the victims of Hitler's Holocaust. These are the dead bodies. They just dumped them into massive graves. Again, you ought to do that. This is a rally at Nuremberg. You can see the pulpit there where the man is standing on the bottom of the center of the picture. I stood there and looked out over this huge parade ground, and this whole pulpit area is a long bleacher section, all made out of granite by these Jewish slaves who died in the process of carrying these, you know, granite slabs. They sawed them out of the ground, out of the granite mountain, sawed them into slabs, polished them, you know, transported them for Hitler to build this massive theater at Nuremberg. Hitler strove to do everything in huge, grand scale. As you stand there in that pulpit, you feel real tiny because this area is just massive, giant parade grounds. Hitler wanted to make the individual feel small and expendable, and the cause seem great. That same thing is going on today in our public schools with the environmental movement. You're just one little person, but look, we got to save Mother Earth. The environment is so huge and you're just so tiny. You're expendable. The cause is great. Same kind of mentality. You got to watch for that. Hitler knew you have to indoctrinate the youth. He closed down Christian schools and began indoctrinating his youth with the Aryan supremacy idea. Hitler kept referring to the Jews as a parasite in the body of nations. And what do you do with a parasite? You try to get rid of it. And he said, oh, the Jews are parasites in his book, Mein Kampf, right here. You can read it for yourself. He said, the Jews are just a parasite. It's interesting, the abortionists today refer to the unborn child as a parasite in the woman's body. Makes you wonder where they got that mentality, huh? During the time Hitler was in control, and even way before that, this was taught, it's still taught today, by the way, that the embryo growing inside the mother has gill slits. It was a German professor, Ernst Haeckel, who made this up in 1869. This influenced the Germans. He traveled all over Germany and converted people to believing in evolution with his big charts. This led to the idea that if evolution is true, then, you know, one race must be superior. And obviously, you know, it's us. That's kind of the way it ended up, you know. 1870, we had Otto von Bismarck. You know, the Bismarck was named after him. Otto von Bismarck started the war, you know, to prove the Germans are superior. If you're going to have a contest to see who's superior, how do you decide? Well, you got to fight it out. We do the same thing today in football, boxing. You know, who is superior? Let's duke it out and find out. Haeckel was a liar. Here are the drawings that he made on the top. Underneath are actual photographs of these creatures. We covered that in, you know, seminar part 4. He was just flat a liar. But that had a strong influence on, and still does today. I read a letter to the editor yesterday from the St. Louis News Post-Dispatch, where this medical doctor wrote in, and they asked me to comment on it because I do every Wednesday morning a radio station in St. Louis. I'm on the air at 7:20 doing a call-in talk show. Have for a long time with the Tim and Al show, KJSL St. Louis. This doctor had written a letter, and they faxed it to me. And he said, we've got proof for evolution. The human embryo has gill slits. This guy's a medical doctor. He ought to know that was proven wrong in 1874. But he's still teaching it. Here, 2001, teaching people, yeah, we got proof for evolution because of the gill slits. I mean, talk about behind the times. Hey, it works. It makes kids believe in evolution. So go ahead and teach it. Hitler was talking to a man one time. This man said, you'll never get me to come into your camp. I'll never be a Nazi. Hitler responded, this new state will give its youth to no one, but will instead take youth and give to youth its own education and its own upbringing. Your child belongs to us already. What are you? He said, you'll pass. We've already got your children. And they did. They put the children in Hitler's training in the school system and made good Nazis out of them. And boy, by the end of the war, I mean, the 13-year-olds were going off to fight for the fatherland. They simply were not going to surrender. They'd been taught, hey, we're superior. We've got to win this war for the good of humanity. In Skokie, Illinois, which is a Chicago suburb, my brother Mark lived there for a while in Skokie, Illinois. In 1993, a man shot a doctor, a plastic surgeon, just shot him and killed him. He told the police he chose a plastic surgeon from the phone book and killed him. Because they, that is the hairdressers and people who make blue-tinted contact lenses, are diluting the Aryan beauty. There is still, today, a very strong Nazi movement. The idea that the white race is superior. That's the basis behind the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. That's the basis behind the shooting at Columbine High School. Those kids at Columbine were strong followers of Adolf Hitler. They did the shooting on Hitler's birthday on purpose. It was to commemorate Hitler. They wanted to eliminate anybody that wasn't up to what they thought was what they're supposed to be. They shot Cassie because she believed in God. They shot Isaiah Shoals just because he was black. That was straight from Hitler. Same kind of philosophy. This book we mentioned earlier, Hitler's Cross by Moody Press and Moody Bible Institute, Chicago, is really good, showing what were the Germans doing, what were the German churches doing, Christians. Hitler used this as a propaganda picture. He's walking out of church. Notice the cross above his head. Hitler's propaganda minister was really good at making people believe, oh, Hitler's a good Christian guy. He's really trying to do what's best for our country. You know, we better follow him. They had Nazi baptisms. These pictures are all from this book right here. Okay? They had Nazi altars. Some churches even took their Bible off the pulpit and read from this book right here, Mein Kampf, preaching German, Aryan supremacy. Hitler said, if you tell a lie long enough and loud enough and often enough, the people will believe it. And they're more likely to believe a big lie than a small one. And boy, that's the truth too. Okay, so Nazism is founded solidly on the idea of evolution. Yeah, I don't think you're going to understand World War II until you put it all together and say that's what happened. We have plenty of books, Final Entries, 1945, The Black Angels, the story of the Waffen-SS. Anyway, let's take a little break. After the break, we'll talk more about how evolution is the philosophy for the New World Order, coming soon to a city near you. Right? Break time. I'm going to talk now about how evolution, the idea that man is God, basically, which is what evolution boils down to. Satan said to Eve in the Garden of Eden, ye shall be as gods. This seems to be the primary philosophy and thinking that he is using to bring about what's going to be a one-world government, commonly called a New World Order. Satan, for all of his time that he's been in existence, apparently, except for the first maybe 100 years, Satan wants to be the ruler of the world. He wants to control this place. He wants it all to himself. He wants us gone because we're made in the image of God. He doesn't like us. We're not welcome here. The United Nations seems to be the primary key factor and key player now in the drive toward a one-world government. Some of the goals of the United Nations, this was at the meeting held in September of 2000. They said, here's the goals, okay? We're going to establish a standing UN military force that can intervene in the internal events of any country. Steve, in the military, do you ever have to, do they have the military and Marines use United Nations patches or UN?
I believe so.
You'll see that coming soon. That's why they're Velcroed on. You know, take off your patch, put a UN patch on.
I know there was that big stinker a couple of years ago about that. The one
Michael knew. Yeah. He refused to wear the UN patch. He said, I'm a United States soldier, not a United Nations soldier. And one of the things that happened with the Gulf War is we kind of got used to the idea of the United Nations conducting wars. Same thing with the Korean War. Same thing with Vietnam War. You know, this is supposed to be a United Nations doing this. And it's just psychological conditioning of the people to accept the idea of United Nations having an army. They want to eliminate the veto power held by the U.S. in the Security Council. This is their goals as of the year 2000. They want to give the United Nations jurisdiction over the Earth Commons. That means the United Nations, this is the goal that they want, the United Nations will have the authority to decide who gets to control the oceans, the minerals, the Earth's crust, the atmosphere, the airwaves, and etc. Everything. They will think they own and control and decide on the Earth what's going to happen. They've already divided the Earth up into sections. We are in section 54. They know that American troops will not be likely to fire on American citizens. So they've already got the world divided up into sections where different troops will control different sections. Like American troops will be over in Bosnia, while Russian troops are over here. Just in case there's any, problem, you send in the Russian troops. So it's a good thing we got a bunch of people on our staff that speak Russian, because they'll be in charge of basically all of the southern United States, except for California area. The Belgians will have the north central United States. The troops from Venezuela will have the New England states. It's already divided up where, who will not be loyal to those people, but will be loyal to the United Nations. This is the way it's going to work. They've been making plans for their new world order for many years. Satan has been making these plans. The Lord is in heaven laughing about it. We as Christians do not need to get nervous about this. We need to get busy. God is laughing. When you read Psalms chapter 2, the Lord said, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel together," let's put UN in there, "against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision." God is laughing at these plans for a new world order. Now, it's a little tougher to laugh on our perspective, because we're going to have to go through some of these problems, but God is not nervous. And if we're His children, we should not be nervous either. At the UN Secretary General meeting agenda for September 6, the year 2000, they said we want to give the UN the power to tax. Coming soon now, you watch this. It will be able to tax fishing on the oceans, particles being emitted into the atmosphere, extraction of minerals from the earth. You want to take some coal out of the ground? Sure, you just pay the United Nations a tax, because after all, it belongs to them. That's their thinking. This power to tax the global commons will quickly make the UN more powerful than any country, including the U.S. This is all part of the plan. They want to grant the UN authority to regulate international commerce, and they want to control food. Right now, last I heard was like 95 to 97% of all food distribution in the world is controlled by ADM, Archer Daniel Midland Corporation, which is, I think, if I have all this straight, it's been a while since I put these details together, Prince Philip of England is one of the key players in here. See, the English rulers in England, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, they think they are of the Illuminati bloodlines. There's some good books if you want to get into more on that topic. The Illuminati, the top 13 Illuminati bloodlines, they really think they're the superior ones, and these are the ones that over the centuries have been kings and queens, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord. They really think they are superior for some reason, and they're going to find out Judgment Day that they're not, but meanwhile, they're pretty hard on everybody else down here, because they think, if you want to get more on that topic, read that book, but they think they're superior. Peter Singer, father of the animal rights movement, said, "Christianity is our foe. If animal rights is to succeed, then we must destroy the Judeo-Christian religious tradition." The Christians are the enemy. We will not be welcome. You mentioned during the break that, Hitler said the Jews are inferior, they need to be eliminated. It's just a simple matter of painting the Christians with that same brush saying, well, these Christians are not going along with our plans for a new world order. We really need to eliminate them. We will become hunted. We'll be the enemy. We won't fit into the new world order. The United Nations' goal is to establish a new seat of power in the UN called the People's Assembly, to consist not only of representatives from nations, but also of representatives from non-government organizations. The Secretary General and his allies can then decide which NGOs are represented and can thereby control the decisions made by the UN. Suppose there's 220 countries in the United Nations, and they create 230 non-government organizations. Now you have majority vote. Simple. Create a new international court that will have jurisdiction over all nation states. This is the goal of the United Nations. You need to read this book, and I brought several if you want to look at them. They're $5. It's Peter Kershaw, Hush Money. This is basically 2 chapters of his bigger book, which is much better, if you want the whole story, In Caesar's Grip. Now, we carry both of these in our bookstore at less than the recommended price because we want people to get, I think this is $5 and this one's $15. If you want to understand how the churches and people have been tricked into going along with the New World Order, these would be great books to get to comprehend what's happening. Oh man, what a long story. Churches, 100 years ago or so, there weren't any, very, very few, incorporated churches. You want to start a church, you start a church. You don't ask anybody's permission. You just start one, okay? When I started this ministry, Creation Science Evangelism, we didn't ask anybody's permission. God wants us to do it. Okay, God, you own the world. You told me to do it. How much higher do I need to go for authority? I don't need to get the government's authority for do something God told me to do. Now, in typical Caesar fashion, the government doesn't like that idea. They want everybody to get their permission. A true church, a real honest-to-goodness, true biblical church, not a corporation of the government, cannot get building permits because that is subjecting God. The churches say, well, Jesus Christ is the head of the church. Oh, yeah? You're just saying that, okay? You don't really believe that. Our founding fathers would have turned over in their grave if they'd have thought that the government was going to tell the church, you got to get our permission to build a building. They'd have started another revolution over that. And yet 99% of the churches in America are corporations because they somehow think they have to get that 501c3 status to be tax exempt. Because they think, goes back to the love of money, root of all evil, they think people will give more money to the church if they're 501c3. The truth of the matter is, most of the folks probably don't have to pay income tax anyway, but they're doing it. The church certainly does not have to have 501c3 status, and Peter Kershaw goes into all the details in here. As introductory statement, the whole first paragraph is from a IRS, one of the leaders in the IRS, who says, I don't know why the churches are getting incorporated, but as long as they want to, that's great. We'll be glad to take them under our authority. That's basically what happens. A church can, we can give, if somebody wants a tax write-off, they can donate to our ministry, we can give them a receipt, and they can use it as a tax write-off. There's nothing wrong with that, perfectly legal. But the last thing we're going to do is become a corporation. A 501c3 status would be the dumbest thing any ministry could do, in my opinion. Read this and then you'll agree with me, okay, if you see Peter Kershaw's opinion here. This, though, is part of the plan to get the church under control of the government because they want to have a one world, new world order. One world government with the United Nations in charge of everybody. So I'd recommend you read that. Congressman George Hansen from Idaho, in the foreword to this book, In Caesar's Grip, he said, it's impossible to have religious freedom in any nation where churches are licensed to the government. If your church government, is your church government licensed, or your church 501c3 and or incorporated as a non-profit organization, that's exactly what it is. It's a corporation of the government. It's not a church anymore. You know, the IRS acknowledges that churches are automatically tax exempt and tax deductible without applying for 501c3 recognition. No church has to have this. Once they do, that puts them under the government, and now they've got all these rules and regulations. The way our founding fathers designed it in the Constitution was, you have the government and they have their sphere of influence, and the church is sovereign like Mexico. We don't tell the Mexicans what to do, and the Mexicans don't tell us what to do. If a Mexican police officer showed up at the door and said, Steve, come with me, you're under arrest for driving too fast. Your question to him is, sir, what authority do you have over me? He doesn't have jurisdiction. Okay? It's a big deal in the military. You know, where's your jurisdiction end? The government has no jurisdiction over a church. None. Now, they do have jurisdiction over corporations. So if a church decides to become a corporation, well, now the government can tell them what to do. And the government can tell them, you have to hire so many gays on your staff, you have to hire so many whatever. They can tell them that. And many churches are ranting and raving and complaining, saying the government has no business doing this, you know. D. James Kennedy, Coral Ridge Presbyterian, great godly man, but he doesn't understand this concept. Because he's out there saying, you know, the IRS is ruining churches. They're telling us you can't talk on these certain topics or you lose your 501c3 status. And the IRS has done that. If a church gets involved in politics, the IRS will say, look, if you talk on that topic, if you get up in the pulpit and tell your people who to vote for, we're going to jerk your 501c3 status. Well, so you don't need that 501c3 status anyway. But the pastor thinks he does to keep the offerings coming in. Love of money, root of all evil. And so this is hush money to keep the preachers quiet. That's what the purpose, that's why the title of the book and the guy with the tape over his mouth, hush money. Keep the pastors quiet by controlling the money. And you ought to read both of those. Okay. Senator from Nebraska was involved in going after a preacher who had a Christian school without a license. Now, Everett Sullivan, who started this Christian school without Nebraska license, okay, and the state came after him. He said, we're a church and we don't have, you don't have any authority over us. The problem was his church was incorporated. Now, it took Sullivan some time in jail and finally a judge filled him in on what's happening. The judges, many of the judges fully understand this, okay? The average person does not. Sullivan, they said, Sullivan, you can't have a Christian school without a license. He said, I'm doing it because God told me to do it. Bless God, I'm standing my ground. And boy, the preachers all over America went to Nebraska and stood there in front of the church, you know, and locked arms, and the police came in and dragged him off and padlocked the doors. They took Sullivan out of the pulpit while he was preaching. Handcuffed him, led him out the door to jail. And everybody thought, wow, this is the end of the freedom of the church in America. No, it was the end of the freedom for your church when you became a corporation. It was your mistake. Lester Roloff, remember Lester Roloff in Texas, Roloff Homes? He spoke at our church in Texas the last Sunday before he was killed. 2 days later, his airplane crashed. Lester Roloff had a great ministry at Corpus Christi, Texas. Okay, Roloff Evangelistic Enterprises Incorporated. Well, he ran these homes for kids that were in trouble. You know, parents would send them down there, you know, please, you know, fix my kid. They're a rebel or whatever. And they did a great job of redeeming lives, you know, through scripture and hard work and stuff like that, and diet. Doing a great job. The state came in and said, we want to regulate your home. We want to tell you, you know, what you can do and what you can't do. Roloff said, you're not telling us what to do. We're a ministry of God. So they came in after him and were shutting him down. And so Roloff reorganized and put his homes under a church, the People's Baptist Church of Corpus Christi, Incorporated. Stepped right back into the same trap and probably died never understanding what he did wrong. They're not going to tell you. You want to be incorporated? Sure, come on into our side. We'll be glad to have you. We'll be glad to have the revenue. So when I die, and Eric, if you take over this ministry, do not incorporate this thing, okay? You got it straight? Okay. Anyway, during the trial of this Pastor Everett Sullivan in Nebraska, he was, you know, on the radio saying, bless God, we're a church and the state's coming after the church. Well, he didn't understand. He wasn't a church. He thought he was, but he wasn't. He was a corporation. And the senator from Nebraska, who before that was the Nebraska Board of Education member, and then later became senator, I believe, or maybe he was senator first. Anyway, his name is Peter Hoagland. He's on the radio debating with Everett Sullivan. And on the radio, Hoagland said, fundamentalist parents have no right to indoctrinate their children in their beliefs. We are preparing their children for the year 2000 and life in a global one-world society, and those children will not fit in. He knew, as a senator, there are plans for a one-world government. Just like Hitler prepared the kids for their one-world government, you know, their Third Reich, the 1,000-year reign of the Aryan race. Hitler worked on preparing the children. There are people who want to prepare our children for a new world order. All over the United States, UN military equipment is already being spread out. The plans are being laid and implemented to have a one-world government. They have portable detention camps. Pull up a truck, take off the camp, you have a prison anywhere. Have a riot in Pensacola, too many people not taking the mark of the beast, well here, put them in prison. I can talk for hours on this. Gary Fry, a friend of mine in North Carolina, is quite an expert on the New World Order. I pretty much speak on creation, evolution, but since evolution ties into communism, socialism, Marxism, that's why we hit it in this part of our series. But Gary Fry, his website, youthofamerica.com/Gary Fry, and his phone number is right there. He has great information if you want more on the New World Order, the camps that are being set up, what's happening with the bombing of TWA 800 and who blew up Oklahoma City. He's got tons of material on that. Very good stuff. Get a hold of Gary if you want more on that. Okay. Let's see. They're putting lines in the highway to count the traffic, of course, is the excuse. I talked to the guy from Crestview, Florida, who's doing the ones all over the state of Florida. He was contracted to cut the grooves and put these lines in there. They put 3 number 14 wires in each slot, and he said, yeah, we can tell how fast the cars are going. We can tell basically what type of car it is by the length of the wheelbase. You know, the magnet picks up the first one and picks up the second one and calculates based on the speed and based on the time it took to go over the magnet. It's, you know, such and such. It's a bus or a truck or a car or whatever. He did not know, but I have been told by reliable sources that 3 number 14 wires is sufficient to handle the charge, the voltage, to have electromagnetic burst, EMF, electromagnetic, no, there's another name for it. What is it? EMP. Pulse, okay. Atomic bombs do this. If an atomic bomb goes off overhead, it produces electromagnetic pulse that will basically destroy computers within a certain effective radius. Just blow their brains out, okay? Almost all cars built after 1982 are electronic ignition, and a good EMP will shut them down. There's been research, and I've heard it's in effect now, it's available now, where you can simply have these, like a radar gun, but you aim it at a car, and it will shut off electronic ignition. For catching speeding thieves will be the, speeders will be the excuse. But all they got to do is apply that same technology to those who are running from the New World Order. Shut down traffic, snarl traffic. Over to the side, we've got them all over Pensacola, these lines in the highway. Over to the side, you'll see on Interstate 10 there are several of them. And they're positioned in such a way that basically you don't think you could get around them. You got to go over it. And my understanding is they're capable of shutting off electronic ignition cars. Now, one solution to this is take out your electronic ignition distributor and put in the old-fashioned distributor with points and plugs, and it's simple wiring, and now you have you don't get as good a gas mileage, maybe not quite the horsepower, but it'll keep running because it's not affected by the EMP. All over the United States, you see cameras going up. How many have seen those before? We've got them all over Pensacola here. Makes you wonder who's watching and why. What's going on? Of course, first you create a crisis, and then you bring in your solution. So they create a traffic problem. Well, we've got to watch the traffic flow here, now the police can respond more quickly if there's a traffic accident. We can see it. Well, that's true. They're probably using it for that. I don't question that. But what other ulterior motive is there behind all this? It always makes you wonder when the government gets involved. United Nations received a gift from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, in 1959. Here this guy is beating a sword into a plow. Now what's the symbolism behind this, do you think? Remember the Bible says when Jesus reigns, they're going to beat their swords into plowshares. Quit fighting, start farming. Let's get along, cooperate. This is just propaganda to make them think, well, yeah, the Soviets want peace. Sure, they want a piece of North Korea, they want a piece of South Korea, they want a piece of North Vietnam, they want all the pieces is what they want. And their definition of peace is very simple. Absence of resistance. As long as nobody's fighting back, we'll have peace. That's what they think. United States Declaration of Independence. Our founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, or inalienable rights. Where do rights come from? They come from God. So why do we ask the government for permission to do things? If God tells us to have a church, why would we ask the government for permission to have a church? Like Peter Kershaw covers in his book, In Caesar's Grip. Any church that gets 501c3 incorporated does not understand what they have done. And we got a lot of these professional, Christian church tax counselors that are out there telling, oh, you have to be 501c3. Well, just read this book first, and then you make your own intelligent, informed decision. It goes back to the two basic philosophies of government. There's two basic philosophies of the whole world. There is a God, or there isn't. Boils down to that. If there is a God, then He tells us right and wrong. He tells us what to do. If there is no God, then we better get all the smart men together and we better decide what we think is right and wrong. Humanism. Two basic religions in the world. There's a God, or man is God. Covered that before. That's what it boils down to. Now, if evolution is true, and there is no supreme being, then laws come from man's opinion. People get together and vote on right and wrong. Rights are granted by the government. The government says you have the right to get married. You have the right to be born. In China, you can only have one child. You get pregnant again, they're going to force you to have an abortion. It's been going on for a long time in China. One child per family. Well, when you got married, Eric, we didn't get a marriage license. Got a marriage covenant. A legal marriage is you and your wife or husband sign the document and two witnesses. If it's in a family Bible, if it's a religious document, that's all that's necessary. Now, several times you've had hassles because of that. Because the banks are tied into this. Everybody's tied in together with this plan toward a one world government. And a lot of Christians have been asleep thinking, well, when they come knocking on my door to make me get one of these little microchips in my hand, they're not going to get me to put it in. You've already received a Social Security number. You're already doing 90% of your transactions with credit. Yes, you'll receive one of these. It's just going to be a matter of you can't buy or sell till you have one. Simple. They're not going to force you to get it. You'll come ask them for it. Can I please have one? I'm hungry. I predict that's what will happen. If evolution is true, then the government should be the provider. This is where our welfare state comes in. It's called a democracy. Democracies are dangerous forms of government. I don't recommend anybody have a democracy. But here we got our people in America, and Bill Clinton was his big thing was we're going to spread democracy around the world. Any place the United Nations went in to establish a democratic government, it ended up with a communist government. That's really what they ended up with. If creation is true, then laws come from the Creator, and rights, you can't put a lien against them. They're unalienable or inalienable. You cannot put a lien against these rights. And government is limited. There are two legitimate functions of government: punish evildoers and defense against outside invaders. You guys in the military, that's a legitimate function of government. The judicial system, punish evildoers, that's what they're supposed to do. Welfare, no, government's got no business being involved in that. Education, no, government simply has no business being involved in it. This earthquake in Seattle, Washington, destroyed a bunch of buildings. They declared a federal disaster area. Well, look, I think it's horrible. I mean, I got a brother and a sister living up there, okay? Yes, it's horrible what happened in Seattle, Washington. However, the government has no business being involved in taking money from people in Florida and sending it to Washington. Government's not supposed to do those kind of things. It's unconstitutional. But they've been doing it for 100 years and nobody stops them. Under a constitutional republic, the law is supreme because the law came from God. People got together, read God's laws, and said, okay, how does this apply to us today? And they made laws for their people in line with God's laws, basically the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. Okay, God says don't kill. All right, if you kill, here's what happens. God says don't steal. Okay, if you steal, here's what's going to happen. Here's the punishment, penalty. And one of the smartest things we could do in America would be to close down, just almost totally, but close down the prisons. We don't need prisons. It's the dumbest thing you can do is pay $100,000 a year to keep some guy locked up. For certain crimes, he should be executed. For other crimes, he should pay back fourfold like the Bible says. That would stop 90% of the crime right there. Okay, my hobby horse. What happens, though, in our time we have remaining, they will create a crisis which will cause the people to accept more government intervention. When things are going wrong, people say, oh, government, save us. There's a great book called The Medusa File, right here, if you want to get more on some of the conspiracies of the past and things that have happened. Like what happened to all the American prisoners that the Japanese took? Why weren't they all returned? Many of those went into coal mines as slaves in Russia. The Japanese sold them. Sold the prisoners. Vietnam War. GIs were captured, sent to North Vietnam. From there, sent up to China as slaves into the labor camps. We go into North Vietnam looking for, where's all the missing, POWs and MIAs? Oh, we don't have any. Take a look. Yeah, they're up in China or Russia. Still, today. Great book, The Medusa File. The John Birch Society, they're now calling it General Birch something or other, because the John Birch Society's got kind of a bad, because of all the media slurs, that name kind of comes across bad. I'm not a member of the John Birch Society. I'm not against it at all. Okay, in fact, I'm for it. But just so folks know, I'm not a member. John Birch was in China when the communists took over, and he was murdered by the Chinese communists. So to fight communism worldwide, the John Birch Society was started in his honor. And they still have active groups all across the United States. Les Roberts, our friend here in Pensacola, is a member of the John Birch Society and is just loaded with information on, what's going on with communism, and they're still trying to get a one-world government. And if you think the Berlin Wall came down because communism was defeated, boy, have you been duped. The Berlin Wall came down because they didn't need it anymore because there's just as much communism on the other side. Don't need that wall anymore. Get at the website cuttingedge.org for lots more information on this topic. There's a book called The Protocols of Zion. Now, there's a lot of controversy about this, and Eric, just because I mentioned this, you're going to probably take some flack because the Jews will get real upset about this. Apparently what happened, this is the Hovind theory, okay? Some of the rich guys in the world who want to control the world created a plan of how to gain control of the world. They wanted to blame it on the Jews. So they wrote the book and called it Protocols of Zion for Jews. Some of the leaders of the New World Order are Jewish, okay, but I don't think all of them are, to my knowledge. But the purpose was to write this book to tell everybody what's going to happen, and at the same time, protect yourself in case this book gets discovered by the wrong people. And sure enough, the wrong people have it. I have it. I'm definitely one of the wrong people. Never mind. So if we can get you a copy of the Protocols of Zion, I've got it in my computer right here. I could call it up. It's like 80 pages or something. So if we just simply print, or you can get it at any library, I think. If our printing cost would be, well, Becky, you could run copies if somebody wants it. Let's sell it for $5. Huh? I can't hear you. $8. Okay, that would cover our running all the pages, 80 pages, stapling them together. $8 if you want one of those. Or if you can get it at your library if you want. But here's a quote from the Protocols of Zion. Confirmation of Rathenau's statement came 20 years later in 1931 when, whatever this guy's name is, a prominent member of the Jewish Alliance Israelite Universelle wrote in his Paris, La Capitale des Religions, the meaning of the history of the last century is that 300 Jewish financiers, all masters of lodges, rule the world. Interesting. He's claiming here that 300 Jewish financiers that are masters of lodges, Masonic lodge, stuff like that, are the ones who really rule the world. There's a book called The Committee of 300. As you read the book, you'll say, wow, this is what's going on, huh? These are the guys who want to control the world, and here's how they're going to do it. It's all spelled out right here. This, did I put in the front cover where to get it? Dr. Lauren Coleman wrote the book. Let's see, ocular enhancers again. You can write to WIR 2533 North Carson Street, Suite J-118, Carson City, Nevada, 89706. Becky, make a note, if you would, for me to put that address on this 5A slide 343. Okay, and it's off the back of the book. I'll put that on here so folks at home can watch that. If you want to get more about the Committee of 300. These are probably the ones who really ultimately make the decisions. That would trickle down to other groups that are involved in this, like the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR. If you want to get more on the Council of Foreign Relations or some of those, you might want to get any of the books by Des Griffin. He's really good on this topic also. We sell this one, The Fourth Reich of the Rich, in our bookstore. You can get it. But he's written lots of other books like Descent into Slavery, Des Griffin. I think he's written 4. Very knowledgeable on the topic of the New World Order if you want to get into that. So what they do, what the bad guys do, they create a crisis so that people will come along and ask the government, please help us, please do this for us. So they created the Depression, 1929, stock market crash, so that people would come ask the government, would you please take care of us, feed us? The government said, sure, sure, here, take this number. Social Security was introduced in 1933 in the middle of the Great Depression. The Civil War was purposely created as part of the plan toward a one world government. So was World War I, so was World War II. The 1929 Depression, Churchill was brought into the visitors gallery at the New York Stock Exchange to witness the stock market crash caused by the Federal Reserve. Yes?
You mentioned that the Civil War is Lincoln's War.
Yes. Abraham Lincoln was a big player in this. Now, he had some very good qualities, okay? He did not claim to be a Christian. Matter of fact, he claimed not to be a Christian. One of the last entries in his diary was, you know, he said, I've been concerned about publicly professing my faith in Christ. I intend to go forward at the, I think it was Presbyterian Church this Sunday, and be baptized. That Thursday he was shot. So maybe later on he did, you know, become a Christian, but he was a player, probably unknowingly, to some degree, in the plans for the New World Order. He was the first, he issued the first executive order. There are now 13,000 of them, executive orders. First executive order, I think it was number 1, was to send federal troops to fight the Civil War.
Is that why it's referred to as Lincoln's War?
Lincoln's War. A lot of people were involved in this war, and it's like any conspiracy. It's really complex to figure out who did what. The Catholic Jesuits were very involved in starting this war, and they hated Lincoln. Okay? One of the problems was Lincoln was not going to go along with the Federal Reserve idea of letting the bankers control the banks in America and control the money with the Federal Reserve system we now have. Lincoln issued greenbacks. Well, a greenback is a treasury note that is not, there's no interest on it, so the bankers don't make any money. And they got upset about that. So there were a lot of folks upset with Lincoln. The Catholics certainly wanted to kill him. The bankers certainly wanted to kill him. Several people were after him. That's a big conspiracy. I'm not sure of all the details on that, but there's good books on it. I'm sure Gary Fry would have something on that, or certainly Des Griffin would definitely know, or Bill Still would know that if you want to get a hold of them. The Cuban Missile Crisis is an example of the technique that they use. The communists have a technique. When you want to advance, you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And your enemy thinks, oh, he backed up. It's over. Well, yeah, he's 1 step closer. They wanted to get a military base in Cuba, right at the bottom of America, 90 miles from Florida. So they brought in a military base and missiles. Kennedy huffed and puffed and had the big Cuban Missile Crisis, and everybody was scared we're going to go, World War III is going to start here, And so after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the communists took the missiles out of Cuba, we think. They had ships with missile shapes on them covered with tarps. And they allowed us to fly by and photograph them. Oh, yeah, you can build one of those out of wood, you know. So we think they took the missiles out. I don't know. But they kept the base. That's what they wanted. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And everybody in America said, oh, wow, they changed. We got rid of, well, we beat them that time, didn't we? Well, idiot. They beat you. Is that what happened? Okay. Oklahoma City bombing. Get the website harvest-trust.org or talk to Ben Parton. Now, Ben Parton, it was a explosives expert. I think he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He did a great videotape with Gary Fry. There's Ben Parton's phone number right here. Ben Parton did a tape with Gary Fry on TV. Gary Fry's in North Carolina. You think you met him, didn't you? Okay. He said, look, folks, I'm an explosives expert. A truck bomb did not blow up the Oklahoma City building. Absolutely no possible way. That building was blown up from inside, probably C4 explosives wrapped around the pillars. Because an explosion in the truck is not going to knock all these pillars out. But there is still today news media spin going on trying to convince the people that that bomb, the truck bomb, did it. Watch the footage we have. I think you've seen this, Eric, haven't you? Of the, right after this happened. They're talking about, now today they talk about this huge Ryder truck full of fertilizer that exploded and blew a big crater in the ground. Watch the footage. They're walking right up to the building. There's no crater in the ground. There never was.
No nitrous oxide either. No residue of nitrates. There would have been poison gas from the explosion that knocked out people.
And the people across the street, sitting in the restaurant, you know, broke a few windows. Why didn't it blow the wall out of that building? And pieces of the Muir building landed across the street. It blew out. It didn't blow in. You don't need to be a genius to figure it out, okay? But you tell the lie long enough, the people believe it. And the poor victims of the Oklahoma City bombing are thinking, this Timothy McVeigh did it and that guy ought to be hung, you know? Well, he might have been a patsy involved in this, but he didn't blow that building up. Okay, he's taking the blame for it. But that is not what happened. Call Ben Parton if you don't believe me, okay? Ask him. What was happening, one of the purposes of blowing up the building, there were several purposes apparently, was to get rid of a couple of agents who were not loyal, who were going to squeal on Bill Clinton apparently, about what happened at Waco. And they happened to be the only ones in the building who died. That morning at 8:05, I think, whatever time it was, you know, they decided the government agents are going to get in a bus and take a tour of Oklahoma City. Well, duh, they live in Oklahoma City. What if I got our staff together one morning, hey, we're going to tour Pensacola. I live here, I don't want to tour Pensacola, let's get to work, okay? So only those that were not loyal were left behind, and they happened to die. Same thing if you watch what happened at Waco, when they climb up the ladder to the roof and the agents go in the door, in the window on the roof. A few minutes later, the other agent who's still out there throws in a hand grenade and starts shooting a machine gun in through the same window. His guys are in there. Then you watch, and a few seconds later, you see apparently some of them survived. You see bullets come flying out through the wall. One of them bounces off the guy's helmet, and he slides down the ladder. It was his guy shooting back at him. That wasn't the Branch Davidian shooting in there. The story apparently is that the guys that got killed at Waco were, again, some people who were going to testify against Bill Clinton for some of the things they'd seen him do. I've got a list of 108, I believe, people. I'm sure because of this tape, people are going to ask for that list. So send $1 or something, we'll mail you one. Becky, remind me if you need that, the list of those who've been killed by Bill Clinton, top file drawer, about halfway back. Okay. Another purpose of blowing up the building was there was anti-terrorism legislation that had been stalled in Congress. Congress was not going to vote for this because it took away more rights of the people. They wanted to get this bill passed to prevent people from having machine guns, you know, gradually choke down the system where all you can have is a pea shooter or maybe a rubber band, you know, to defend yourself. Nobody's allowed to have guns. And so they start off by banning, you know, assault rifles. Well, if you trust the government with assault rifles, but you don't trust honest Americans with assault rifles, you got a screw loose in your head. Okay? So, and sure enough, it passed. The anti-terrorism passed after Oklahoma City bombing was blown up. TW-800 was also blown up intentionally, apparently to get rid of the 3 guys who were going to London to testify against Clinton because the local newspapers in America, this story goes, they wouldn't take their story. So these guys all happened to be on one plane going to London. We're going to squeal on Bill Clinton French Landsat satellite, one of the satellites from France, has pictures of a missile hitting the plane. Now the poor victims are being fed this story about, oh, well, we don't know what happened. You know, maybe it blew up, you know. You know, a good way to get rid of somebody is blow up an airplane. You know, pretty hard to figure out what happened, especially when the government's the one doing the investigation of what happened. Yeah. Let's get all the foxes together to try to figure out why the chickens are disappearing. In the book, The Money Masters by Bill Still, he quotes Dave Rockefeller as saying, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." Boy, that's the truth. They want us to accept, you know, their plans, their ideas of a one world government. All they need is a good crisis. And what will happen is the president then has an excuse to declare martial law. And everybody's going to be governed by martial law. Lincoln issued the first one ordering troops into the war. Now there have been 13,000 executive orders. This bypasses Congress. If there's an emergency, you don't have time for everybody to vote on, you know, should we allow money, you know. Hey, there's a war going on. So they will declare war on anything. War on drugs. War on poverty. You got to watch this rhetoric because they're saying these words. I'm a president will say, we're going to declare a war on drugs. Declaration of war abolishes the Constitution, sets him up where he can now, he's dictator. He controls by executive orders. And that's what's been going on for the last 100 years. Lincoln started this whole concept. So these super rich, powerful zillionaires, you know, that want to control the world in America and in Europe are preparing for a war on the people, for anybody who will resist their plans. They want a one world government. They've been working on this for a long time. Here are some of the executive orders. We're out of time. Let's start up next week more on the New World Order and how the evolution philosophy ties in. After all, if there's no God, man decides what's right and wrong. We decide, you know, what to do. And there's so much you can read. Now let me encourage you, I don't want to leave you hanging with this, you know, I read a lot on the topic, okay? It's not time to get nervous. I understand some of what's going on. The Waco whitewash, what really happened at Waco. You want to read about the Waco, you know, how they covered up that story. Really what happened? You want to find out? Here you go. Churches getting incorporated. I go speak in churches that are incorporated just about every week of the year. You want to read about the Council of Foreign Relations, Shadows of Power by James Perloff. Tremendous book on Council of Foreign Relations and how they're, you know, controlling things, or about the Committee of 300 and the Federal Reserve. And I know a good amount of this stuff, what's going on. I'm not nervous. I'm busy. This is the time to quit playing around. It doesn't matter who wins the stupid bowl. Go get somebody saved. And Satan has most of God's children distracted on things that just are not going to matter in 1,000 years. We are wasting our time. That's why we work 100 hours a week around here in developing this ministry. We want to get people saved and get Christians fired up to go get other people saved. That's all that's going to matter. Satan is going to win in the short run. But God is laughing because he sees the bigger picture. Read the last chapter of Revelation. We win. Nothing to worry about. Okay? See you next week.